Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, the official variety podcast of doofmedia.com. My name is Matt Freeman, and I'm joined by fellow cultist of the Go Big Red fan and my brother, Daniel Freeman. Daniel, how's it going this week?
It's going great. I'm surrounded by all of the multiple copies of the Stephenson books that I own, and I am just ready to dive in on this next novel.
Yeah, I somehow own multiple copies of The Diamond Age.
Same.
But I don't know where my copies of... I guess we only ever had one copy of some of these books since we were brothers and lived in the same house.
Yeah, I think I probably have all of the ones that you don't have copies of right next to me
you're right.
at this moment.
Goes without saying that you and I are enormous Neal Stephenson fans. Always have been since we were in the womb, as far as I can recall.
I don't really ever remember a time when I hadn't read a bunch of Neal Stephenson books. So
yeah,
it's sort of like Star Wars.
I think we've read everything that he's written, right? Like literally.
Actually, this is a confession. I'm not actually the ultimate Neal Stephenson fan because I only read like 3/4 of Zodiac, and I never actually read the end. So
okay, well,
no Zodiac
I finished
spoilers.
Zodiac.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
I hope that's not important for this book.
Then this conversation is not going to go very far because that's all I wanted to talk about. Just kidding. So this week we are talking about Neal Stephenson's newest book, Fall, with the subtitle following a semicolon, or Dodge in Hell.
Which is just the Neal Stephenson title that he ever did.
It's great. So one thing you said about this when you had read it and I had not, is you said that this is like the most Neal Stephenson book ever.
Yeah.
And I think that in some senses that's true, and in some senses I don't think it's. I think it's very different. Than his
I mean, I'm always being tongue-in-cheek every time I say anything, but yeah, I think I agree. Like I think he's actually learned as a writer, perhaps, in like how he structured the novel. I'm trying to be vague here, but
Well, so we're gonna do a non-spoiler discussion now, and then we'll clearly demarcate when we move on into spoilers. And I think the first thing that I'll say in a non-spoiler sense is, if you are a Neal Stephenson fan and you've read his other books, then you probably owe it to yourself to go into this book with minimal spoils. And in fact,
like, don't even read the book. Don't read anything on the cover of the book or the back of the book or any of the like supplementary material on the internet. Just read it. Like,
I legitimately wish that I hadn't read the Dust Jacket before starting the book, because I mean, they always do this. I find this happens a lot, but they spoil events that happen like 300 pages into the book, and you're like, I get that you're telling me what kind of story it is, but it would have been so much more impactful and more everything if I had been surprised.
Yeah.
But this book is great. It's God. Yeah. I don't have a ton to say in a no spoiler context. Like you said, he structures the book, I would say, generally better. It's Neal Stephenson kind of has this reputation of not being able to end his books. I think this is the best ending of any of his books.
Yeah, I think I agree.
And I think he's gotten better at that with his last few anyway.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of the Baroque cycle, and it's well, he does this in all of his books, right? Where he kind of sprawls and takes these tangents and goes down these cul-de-sacs of things that are interesting to him. And because he's such a talented writer, he makes it fascinating to you.
Yeah. So I entirely agree with all of that. And it never really feels like a chore. It's always like you're engrossed by the world. I mean, I guess it's probably not a spoiler to talk about where this book is situated in the greater Stevenson like canon.
You'll know within a couple pages that it's effectively a sequel to Reamdy.
Yes.
Although it is so much more.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I honestly, like, I don't, it's hard for me to evaluate the book for someone that hasn't read a lot of the Neal Stephenson canon, just because it's sort of builds off of / continues themes from so many of his other novels.
That's definitely worth mentioning, is that this book basically assumes that you've read like 7 of his other novels. And if you haven't, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, it'll probably be a very interesting novel, but there's just so much more you're probably missing out on. But.
Yeah, right. I mean, just in terms of characters, in terms of, like you said, themes, he's definitely, I mean, I don't know. I wrote that essay a long time ago, and I think if anything, my essay is more true now than it was then, that like he's very interested in this kind of particular view of history and humanity and human nature and the arc of history and how science fits into things.
Yeah.
This is just I think maybe we need to move on into spoilers for me to finish that thought.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I guess so spoilers starting now, and to finish the thought I was going to say, this is just as much a sequel to the Baroque cycle and to the Waterhouse Shafto stories in general, including Cryptonomicon, as it is a sequel to Reamdi. I mean, really the only thing it brings over from Reamdi is the characters Dodge, Zula, basically just them, and the concept that he's a guy who made an MMO. And then kind of from there, it's the themes of the Baroque cycle and Cryptonomicon and what the Waterhouses and Shaftos are trying to accomplish that takes over.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if this was intentional. Like, he realized he needed a character that was like incredibly wealthy to pull off a sort of plot like this. And so he just decided to write a fun, like, adventure romp airport thriller novel to get the kind of backstory for that character in place that he could then leverage into his masterstroke. But I don't know. I'll ask him next time I see him.
Right. No, I don't know. My suspicion was that it went the other way around, that he basically wrote the airport novel that was Reamdi, and then was like, then had the idea that he wanted to write a novel about the singularity.
Yeah,
which is what this is, and then kind of had the thought of like, well, I'm going to write the singularity from the perspective of the characters from my airport novel, because that's the most fun way to do that.
Yeah, which is it's funny because he's kind of shied away from writing about like super intelligent anything in all of his past science fiction, even though he was sort of at the forefront of people thinking about that. Like starting even with Snow Crash, it's like the world has the kind of technology that is, an epsilon away from something like that thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think he's even said this, that he kind of finds the concept boring, and he like doesn't, I don't even remember if I read this anywhere, or I'm just entirely making this up.
I think that you're right. I think that he said that it sort of breaks the story, like to have super intelligence in a story. It's like, well, good, you can't write what a super intelligence would do because you don't know what a super intelligence would do, and also the characters would lose agency. And I mean, I think it's pretty. I think that he's right. Like,
I agree.
Yeah. And in this book, he does some very clever things, I think, to kind of circumvent it. Like, for most of the story, they don't act as though AIs are a powerful agent force. Like they obviously they have machine learning, but they don't have like independent AIs. And then within the land, the AIs that come about are basically screened off from the real world by this like cryptographic inscrutability, and also they're not actually super intelligences. They may be a bit more intelligent than humans.
Yeah.
So let's just like cut deep into it, and instead of going in any kind of logical or linear fashion, I just want to say that I love how he first of all, this is Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Bible, like you said, it's Lord of the Rings, it's every Greek myth or ever written at the same time.
Yeah, every kind of myth.
Which, like, if you've just read Reamdi and like you're hearing us say this and you're confused, yes, correct response.
Right. So my reading is that the Sprung, since they were born of Adam and Eve, are the men in Lord of the Rings. Okay.
Yeah.
The autochthons, which I don't know how to actually say that word, autochthons maybe, are the elves.
Yeah.
Because they're basically like spawned of the pure will of their creator, and they like live forever, and then they like their death is weird. They reincarnate weird or whatever, and then the Beatles, I may be wrong about this. My interpretation is that the Beatles are the orcs, and the Beatles are the reincarnated actual dead humans. So like the only people, I think
that's right.
So the only people who are having a good time in the afterlife are the AIs who were born inside the afterlife. And then like a few like random hill giants and tree spirits and talking raven wizards and stuff.
And El, I guess. Yeah.
And El, yeah. And the Pantheon.
Right.
but it's this. I mean, it's such a fun, like, I don't know, darkly comic, I guess, idea. Like, it's much more along the lines of, he's talking about the Norse and the Greek mythology about how, like, you go to the afterlife and you take a draft from the river or whatever and you lose your memory, and it's like, the darker version of the afterlife that has been in all of religion prior to about 1900, apparently.
Yeah. It's interesting in how, like, at both the same time that it's sort of ridiculous, like how this entire world came into being and like the reasons for it being the way it is, and then at the same time, this is just at people's lives now, and like, it really is this way, and like now this is the actual literal creation myth of the next phase of humanity. So it's well,
and I love that it's a complete, like, it's a mess.
It's an utter
it was
mess.
never in yeah it was never intended to be this way, and I think he's saying something about, like, he's clearly on this kick about fractals. He talks about fractals in the book. The idea is that our world is a simulation from some higher level. Spoilers, Enoch Root is a manifestation from whoever's simulating this world,
which is never explained, and that's the point. It doesn't matter.
But that's fine. That's perfect. We understand what he meant when he said that the Baroque cycle was a science fiction novel. And it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. I never wanted anything more than this answer. Oh, Enoch Root is from this. He's the simulator.
Right.
That's great. It's perfect.
It's perfect.
And Isaac Newton was saved by a box of magic from the higher plane.
Yeah, because he was so important. Yes.
Because he was so important. Yes.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, like, I mean, I love the scene where Elle is like, it wasn't supposed to be this way, and he's like really upset about the fact that the afterlife has taken this shape because it wasn't designed right, and it's like, like, who would design a world like this,
right? But like, it's still totally believable. If humanity, imminently comes across the technology to start like freezing brains, and then eventually you build some simulated universe for people to live in the afterlife, it would be this legal mess, like, in action constantly, and it would be weirder than this, probably. Like, that's the actual best part.
Exactly. I mean, that's always been one of my favorite Stephenson things. Is so there's a kind of science fiction author who, like, creates their world as if trying to make something that makes a lot of sense. And then they have their characters exist in the world. And Stevenson doesn't care whether it makes any sense, because the world doesn't like it makes sense if you drill down into it. But like the reasons that things happen are always the most contingent and idiotic reasons.
Yeah.
So like, just because it can make sense. And this story, I'm not saying the story doesn't make sense. I'm saying the reasons why things happen aren't because it was well thought out. It's just, it's because it was the guy who made MMOs, and he had a lot of practice thinking about building worlds. Yeah,
like, I mean, he's sort of more concerned with telling the multi-generational story of how of where this idea goes than he is with like critiquing the idea of cryonics. Right? It's like, that's who cares? Like that's old news. It's much more interesting to think about, once this thing is in place 20 generations later, what does it look like?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because if you had asked me before I read this book if Stevenson was someone who expected a singularity, I would have trended toward no. But after reading this book, I'm like, oh, I think he and I would probably agree on almost everything about like what the shape of the future could look like. Modulo unfriendly self-improving artificial intelligence. But
yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't have a good read on it, because like, I don't know if you can read. I mean, a lot of people have read things like Snow Crash and then come out and said, like, here, Stevenson is clearly arguing for the impending libertarian future that will be a hellscape or something. And it's like, no, that's like, he doesn't think about.
He's not advocating for what he's writing. He's just,
at no point is he advocating. He's just he's taking an idea and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I didn't mean to imply that this book now suddenly is his true beliefs.
Right,
It's more like I've become less certain that these aren't his true beliefs.
Yeah,
if that sentence does anything for you.
No, that totally, that scans. I gotcha.
So can we talk about the structure of the book a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
So like one thing I thought was really interesting was the variation in writing styles, and maybe my favorite part of the book from the perspective of style was actually the first part of the book, where it's Dodge's point of view, and it's just this highly like impressionistic and like focused on the details of the qualia that he's experiencing, like waking up and like brushing his teeth in the bathroom. And
so that just the entire first chapter basically, where it's like, so I found this deeply disturbing actually, and like extremely foreshadowing heavy, because like I had no idea what was going to happen. I was just like, you know, it's like when a movie like follows a character into the bathroom, and it's like, why are we in? Something's going to happen. Something horrible is going to happen because now we're and this is never shown in a movie. And it just does that for like a whole day. And it's just like Dodge going to the doctor's office, and we're just going to focus on a leaf. We're going to look at this leaf and see how beautiful all the curves,
few pages.
for like a few pages. And it was terrifying and beautiful. And I thought it was great. I thought this is now my new favorite first chapter of a Stevenson novel.
That's pretty funny because I knew he was going to die.
I didn't.
Yeah. It was from one of the things that I had read, unfortunately, was like he dies during a routine medical procedure.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. Why?
I guess it's like impossible to market this book if you don't tell anything about it, but yeah, I don't know.
But I don't think it ruined it for me, because it gave me kind of a delicious dramatic irony where like he eats the bread or he eats the pastry, and I'm like, and I'm just like laughing because I'm like, he's gonna die because he ate the stupid pastry because he didn't want to be rude to somebody. Like that's such a stupid and like realistic like way for this character to die.
And this is how God was born.
Yeah, this is how God was born. It's a fractal. This is why the world is the way it is because God was too embarrassed to not eat a pastry.
Yeah. Basically.
And then so I love that. It's very I think unusual tone for Stevenson to take, and then he moves on into what I consider to be kind of a more typical Stevenson style, where he's, you know, riffing on the technology of the world, and you know, a bit of a cross between like thriller, and we're gonna spend a few pages talking about cryptographic protocols again,
right.
Which is fun, and we should talk about that whole part of the book where it's like Dodge has just died and Corvallis is trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what part of this book is my favorite yet. Like it's interesting how much I liked this part, where I don't even know if I remember it that well, but it's basically just like a lot of very like psychological, painful and realistic depictions of people dealing with this kind of ongoing train wreck of not only is their loved one dying, but he's dying in like this complicated way, and now the legal system is getting involved. Yeah, and
just this horrible legal mess that like everyone is like, it's real. Yeah. It's like it's upsetting. Yeah.
I think probably that was the most, that may be my favorite part of the book in the specific sense that it felt the most like I cared the most about what was happening.
Yeah.
Because later on, it like toward the end of the book, especially, it takes on this kind of like epic journey tone.
Yeah.
And I don't really care about any of the characters at that point because they're just like, it's, you know, I was gonna say like Boromir, but I probably cared more about Boromir, honestly.
Yeah.
Than I care about like the singer who was struck by lightning and vaporized.
Yeah, I mean, I we can talk about that later too, but like I also felt that I only ever really cared about who I could clearly identify as reincarnations of main characters, which wasn't even always easy.
That's true too. I felt I was one thing I wanted to happen that didn't happen is I wanted first of all, I don't know how to say Maeve. Is it Maeve?
Yeah, I think it's Maeve.
I wanted Maeve and Corvallis to have like an overt reconciliation, inside the afterlife, and you see that they're on the same team and they're working together,
Yeah.
but they never talk.
Yeah. So I that may be intentional. It may be that like things that happened before just don't really matter anymore. It also might be that they just don't remember very well, but it's unclear, and it's kind of I agree that it's a missed opportunity that it's unclear how much is
Yeah, well, I agree that it's intentional. I'm just saying I wanted it to happen.
Okay, that's fair.
Because I love their romance, and
Yeah.
just everything about that
How
was great.
Yeah, how it's kind of hilariously creepy that he like basically cyber stalks her to discover her existence,
Right.
leveraging the full power of Facebook.
Yeah.
Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft at the same time.
Yeah. The back door.
Yeah.
And so let's that's a natural segue actually. That's basically the next part of the book, right?
Yeah, right.
Is we skipped ahead a little bit, and Corvallis is like basically this part of the book is almost like a completely separate. I want to talk about this because I want to understand how this ties into the rest of the book. This idea of the fake attack on Moab.
Yeah.
And the consequences of that. So I don't know. I'm just going to run through it in case there are any people who are listening that shouldn't be. That there's sudden news reports of a nuclear attack on the small town of Moab in the middle of the desert in the United States, and everything goes crazy. Social media goes crazy. The news goes crazy, and it's and pretty quickly. The powers that be, and Corvallis is sort of at the forefront of it, put together that this is a clever hoax with just a small handful of well-produced fake bits of footage to make it seem legitimate, but really even those kind of fall down under scrutiny. And but the point of it is that it like this single-handedly destroys trust in the internet and in online news, and then we see like 15 years later results in like people who still believe the Moab attack happened, and then a completely separate like shadow world of people who know that it didn't happen. And I mean it's clear it reminds me a lot of Scott Alexander writing about like the filter bubbles.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I thought this was great, and I had this moment when I was reading this where I was like, well, first of all, as a tangent, I thought this book was going in the direction where there just was a nuclear attack on the U.S. and I was like, oh,
right.
What's going on? But that didn't end up happening, and I actually liked where it went instead. But okay, right. So I had this moment later after I realized where I was going, where I was like, this is ridiculous. People don't believe things, and then I stopped because I realized this is like not even that many steps removed from just a at a distance description of how media is nowadays.
Exactly.
And like how factions exist of people that believe things.
Fake news.
Yeah. Which like, and sort of how much it doesn't matter that people believe fake things. Not in the sense that I'm like making a normative judgment, just that like you can live your life believing that Moab was nuked, and it doesn't really affect your life in any way. It's really entirely just a signal of like which crowds you run with.
Exactly. I wanted to read the card that Sophie carries around, the red card.
Yeah.
Because I simultaneously think it's wonderful and terrible. I could talk about this forever. I don't want this to take up a huge section of the show, but basically it's a red card. It says, number 1, speech is aggression. Number 2, every utterance has a winner and a loser. Number 3, curiosity is feigned. Number 4, lying is performative. Number 5, stupidity is power. And you just know Stephenson thought about this for like a day. But basically, yeah, like this is what I think that he's almost winkingly saying, like you should have this card, print it up and tape it to your monitor. Because there's no point in arguing with people online in particular, but increasingly the same is true in person, because you're just arguing in person with people who are part of these like communities of ideological I don't know what's the word, like it didn't used to be this way, right? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I don't know. So as a huge micro tangent, there's this Netflix show about flat earthers called Behind the Curve. Have you seen this?
I haven't. Really want to, but I haven't.
So it's a great example of like an actually honestly good treatment of talking and describing a community that believes something that's not true. Like I don't know of like a better way of.
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to be mean. It's just like it is a whole bunch of people that find community around something that is just demonstrably not the case. And like I think that's just a human failure mode. Like this is it's something that if enough people find a community around something, it stops being about whether or not something is demonstrably true. It starts just being about like these people that you spent time with over the last year. Yeah. On this thing, and then it just doesn't matter anymore. And it once it gets enough momentum behind it, it can't ever be changed because it's not about the truth of the thing. It was never about the truth of the thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think that does connect into the idea that like that's kind of what a religion is like because their drive, later in whatever 15, 20 years in the future, America has like literally segregated into like the people who live in the cities and Ameristan, which is everything that isn't in the cities, and it's like practically almost Snow Crash like in the degree of anarchy. Or
it makes me actually made me stop and wonder if Snow Crash was supposed to be this universe.
Yeah, me too.
And we never see any of that because it's so segregated from the family we're following because they're like billionaires and billionaire god kings in this world, so like why would they ever know who hero protagonist was? But
I know, I mean, brief parenthetical, but like I was surprised that we never heard of the Leviticans again. Like the whole book I was expecting the Leviticans to like blow up the servers and destroy heaven. Like that's I mean they start out crucifying an angel.
I think a younger Neal Stephenson would have run in this direction, but I think he was too interested in seeing where his simulated heaven went to let that happen.
Yeah.
That's basically the end of like the Big U and like sort of the Diamond Age, and like it's
kind of a big savior moment thing. Whereas I mean it did surprise me that we posit the existence of this whole this whole universe of hyper religious zealots, and then a few years later, everyone in the world is being uploaded, and it's like wouldn't they object to that?
Yeah, so I think this was just a casualty of him wanting to tell a very long spanning story, and like there definitely is a story to tell for that entire many decades long transition period between the balkanization of the United States and then like where it is at the end of the book. But I can't blame him too much for like skipping ahead because
I think the crux of the question that I would ask is El caused the Moab hoax,
right?
But I don't understand why he caused the Moab hoax, and I've only read the book once. I feel like this is something that I just didn't get that I was supposed to get.
Yeah, so he explains that he explains why he did it at one point, and I'm also blanking. Because it was like he did it to basically destroy trust in media, and then he was going to like swoop in.
Oh yeah, he was going to create his own like cryptographically secure system.
Because he wanted to hold the keys of the kingdom of heaven, basically.
Okay.
But this sort of didn't work out for him, and then he just tried to do it anyway. So, he ended up succeeding
basically, with except the whole part where he dies,
right?
Which so just to clarify, a minor thing. Once you're in heaven, if you're killed, you basically reincarnate again, and it's like a painful, slow process, and you lose some of your memories.
I think like all of your memories, unless you are one of the billionaire god kings related to the Fourth Rest family. Was my read. But like, because like I don't think the Beatles remember anything when they're killed. They're just like,
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't think they remember anything from their lives.
yeah,
Like the only reason, well, it's ambiguous whether Elle remembers anything, because I feel like Elle has like special dispensation from like the way he entered, because he had so much power on the network.
Yeah.
And there's like that part where Dodge like flies up to him and suddenly remembers that his name is Dodge and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's not that important. It's just I was trying to nail down like is this a dystopian afterlife, or is this an acceptable, like is this Stevenson's sick twisted afterlife, or is this Stevenson's like interesting, not particularly trying to freak you out afterlife? And I think it's more the latter.
Yeah, I also think it's the latter, even though he calls it hell on the book cover. Like it's sort of what would happen if there were a heaven that was run by humans.
Yeah.
Like inevitably classes would stratify and there would be strife.
Yeah. Well, but it's also better than the world, because everyone's like going on adventures. And it kind of sucks when you die, but if you know you're going to be reincarnated, like factually then dying is like, it's painful because you lose your friends and whatever, but it's less painful than it could be.
Yeah.
So it reminded me actually a lot of Anathem. This idea that the humans from one really crappy universe flew around, the geodesic of space-time or whatever, and then they found that the universe they reached was a bit better, and that was basically our universe. And then they flew it, and then they did it again, and then the world was like even more ideal, and like the more circuits you do, the better the world is going to be. And I was thinking, like, I wonder if like the implication is that the simulators of our universe are less perfected than we are, and this afterlife that Dodge has created, while it's idiosyncratic and random in some ways, is a perfected form of our world. Because it's basically an MMO.
That's right. It's MMO heaven. That's fascinating because Enoch is pretty clearly, seems like he's convinced that he did his job at the end.
Yeah.
And he's like, yes, continue on, human children, or not in his words, but like he's done. Like his mission is served, whatever it was. So I think that is definitely an implication that this is like better than the real.
I think so.
That means.
Well, it seemed acceptable to me. I mean, basically, I would accept Lord of the Rings world as a good afterlife. I'd be fine with that. Middle Earth as an afterlife. I'm not sure if Zula ever actually understood that Enoch wasn't joking about being an angel, but
No, I see your note here, poor Zula, and I'm just like, yeah,
poor Zula, so much.
Poor Zula,
like especially after, the
entirety of Reamdy.
If you're coming off reading Reamdy, you're like, oh, thank goodness she gets a happy ending, and then this book, you're like, oh, she married Songor, and I don't know how to say that name either, and she had a kid, and it's great. Oh no. Dodge. Oh no, her daughter.
Yeah.
And now they're divorcing because they're both too sad.
Just the entire scene where Sophia is killed is just terrifying. Like, that's as close as Stevenson gets to being like, here is your terrifying future.
Yeah. Thrillery.
Yeah.
Although as soon as he spent a couple paragraphs talking about how cold the water was there, I was like, somebody's gonna fall in the water and gonna get cryoed.
That's true.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I wonder who it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
This story was
right. So okay, we're in the middle of Ameristan and the United States breaking apart into bits and pieces, and then so around this time is when, so like all throughout structurally, like Dodge is like figuring out the world as he sort of makes it with his mind,
right?
And I thought this was just so delightful because it's like the game you always wish you could play, where you just like imagine something and it comes into being,
Right.
and then you just keep doing that forever, and it's great, and it's sort of like him coming into power as more intelligences spring into the world.
Yeah, I thought one fun aspect of the way the story is told is that you'll be in the real world, and then you'll get some hint about the next thing that's going to happen, and then you're in Dodge's world, and like people start, you get the hint that they're going to start uploading other people, and then you're in Dodge's world, and little sprite things start showing up in his world, and you're like, so like you're constantly. Stevenson wrote it in a way where you're constantly kind of putting things together, and it's not just being handed to you. Which is very fun. Like it's a very fun and engaging way of telling the story, and you're constantly trying to figure out like, oh, who is this person? Okay, I guess these are these people, but who exactly is this person?
Yeah.
I wondered pretty much the whole book if some of these characters are supposed to be Shaftos or Waterhouses, but I don't know.
Yeah, I guess like no Randy should be alive like in this time because.
Or have died. Like I thought maybe he was one of the ones that was cryopreserved.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Like I thought maybe he has the one lieutenant who is basically Ares.
Yeah.
And I was like, that has to be a Shafto. Come on. Yeah. There's no way that's not a Shafto.
I also liked how he completely stuck to his guns and did everything in the land as like biblically stylized,
right?
Like just full on like a page of text with no paragraph breaks of just like in this like third person omniscient like Bible writing style that it just totally works. Like it's I don't know how he pulls this off. It's like he wanted to just write a Greek myth novel and did. Absolutely.
Like the word choices that he goes for, where it's just on the borderline of being comical, that he's that he's choosing these words to describe these things, because it just makes it sound so biblical.
Like basically the entire story of Adam is hilarious, just because he's kind of dense and nonetheless is just like he's basically Hercules or something. Also, it's great.
Yeah, right. Well, I love Dodge showing up as a worm, like because it's just his sense of humor, basically.
Yeah.
And so you said it was called it was Hell. I was wondering, and I'm not clear on this. Is the implication just that Hell is the place in the sky where all the Pantheon gets launched? And then it's like fiery, and now Dodge is like blackened and has bat wings, which does my interpretation was like, oh, okay, that it isn't saying that the whole land is hell. It's saying that Dodge gets exiled from heaven to hell by the invading El, which is another great reference, and then he's basically Lucifer, and he's trying to get but the twist being that Lucifer is actually the rightful Lord, and comes back into his power at the end of the story, and he's actually a great guy,
and brings humanity knowledge.
Brings humanity
the sin of knowledge.
Yes, brings the sin of knowledge. Yeah, it's completely perfect. It's amazing. I love it. And the ending scene is just the best thing, because that's what you want. Like, I didn't think that was going to happen. I didn't think Stevenson was going to give us that gift of like, aw, but he did, and it was great.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic, like, I think it's maybe the best paced novel that he has written, except maybe Reamdy, because Reamdy's pretty fast paced. It's like it's like popcorn, but like just how he does the time skips to sort of. I think this is actually like a lesson learned from Seven Eves, where everyone freaked out when he jumped like 3,000 years into the future. Spoiler.
I think it was 8,000, but
8,000. Yeah, right. Like that's. People clearly can't handle that, but if you do this in a sim world and you kind of space it out like logarithmically instead of doing one huge jump, then it's fine. Yeah, works great.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the characters, like, it's the fact that all the characters were dead in the future of Seven Eves, whereas in this story, that
they're all clones of characters we knew. See, I liked the ending of Seven Eves. Everyone gives it such a hard time.
I think it was all right. Yeah, I don't think of clones as being the same, whereas Dodge is clearly still Dodge. Like,
yeah, Dodge is still Dodge.
I mean, I think another parenthetical, but like one of my favorite things is like how people are telling stories about Dodge and like how like Dodge's personality. He's just this like take no shit CEO who is also like a former pot smuggler. So he's just very like idiosyncratic and and just kind of a son of a gun.
And just like the only reason he's on ice is because he was like randomly convinced to do this sometime in the 80s or something.
Right. He's just such a lovable, like I don't want to say lovable doofus because he's not dumb, but like he doesn't take things too seriously, and I think that makes you love him.
Yeah.
And that's exactly who he is in the afterlife too.
Yeah.
He's clearly the same person, even if he's forgotten his life.
Yeah, I totally agree across the board.
But yeah, so you know that even though it's in the future, you know Dodge is still Dodge, you know L is still L, even though Sophie, or is it Sophia?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Sophia has been reincarnated. You know, she's still basically the same type of person, or she's been reincarnated twice, and I guess it was like the only part where it was hard for me to care what was happening was ironically the fun adventure into the wilderness.
Yeah.
And that was just because we were meeting so many characters who we didn't know. But I don't want to come down too strong in that statement and say that I like didn't enjoy that part, because that wouldn't be true at all. I absolutely adored the part where you're just like, oh, okay, Neal Stephenson has taken a modern day story, turned it into a science fiction singularity story, and now turned it into a fantasy story seamlessly. It's beautiful.
And I also like how it's like I was a little fuzzy with like how kind of the mechanics of this world, if you will, like just, and it's sort of intentionally not obvious what the mechanics are because it kind of doesn't really matter at the end, but I'm still like a nerd for this kind of thing.
Sure.
But like the one scene where one of the sprung is finally described and you like realize what they are,
right,
is when Sophia sees them. And this is well after like having the story of Adam and Eve and like their children and like, but like that they're basically described as just basically running on more cores than everyone else. They just like look more real and seem more real. Like, I think that's just a fantastic idea.
So, but I think that, so speaking of the mechanics, those were Adam and Eve's literal children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they had children and that's who,
right.
That's who everyone else is who isn't an autochthon.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha. I mean, yeah, that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like I mean, and that's the perfect, yet again, biblically aren't Adam and Eve's children called giants or something like that?
I am not the person to ask about.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it definitely rung a bell, this idea that like he was finding a funny science fiction way of making like the more real than real people. They're the children of Adam and Eve. Of course they would be that way. That they're immortal and everything they do is perfect, and they're like you said, they just have more processing power. There is just more to them, as one of them says. It's and another thing that reminded me of Anathem was this idea that not only is the world better than our world, but the people are better than we are. Like all of the sprung are kind of like implied to be more like upright and clear-eyed and you know, more like the Numenorians, than the smaller stunted men who exist today.
Yeah, it's interesting to try and figure out what Neal Stephenson actually thinks about class when you like see a book like this. Like, I don't think he's really trying to make any kind of political statement, honestly, but I think people will nonetheless try to argue that he's saying something. But like.
I think so. I mean, that was kind of what my essay was about back in the day, where I'm like, I noticed that like if you just read one of his books, you could say, oh, he's obviously an anarcho-libertarian, or oh, he's obviously an utter reactionary and thinks that humans are best ruled by hereditary nobility, or he's obviously an Enlightenment type liberal. who thinks that the Enlightenment values are the crux of how humanity should be governed. And it's like, no, that's not what that's not the project. That's not how he's going about this. He's playing. I mean, it's very much like Heinlein, actually, where like you cannot say anything about Heinlein's beliefs based on Starship Troopers or Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He's just exploring these ideas and having fun thinking through their consequences from the perspective of characters who have a certain point of view on them. But it's not it's not a what's the word for, he's not trying to convince you of anything.
Right. Especially when the victory condition of book is simulated humans are run at like full simulation. Like that is like class victory is that's I think I just fully agree that it's hard to read into what he's trying to say or what he actually believes. Like I get what he's trying to say.
Yeah. Right. I wonder what I was a bit surprised at the kind of the final stroke of the story where they break all of the uploads out of L's like Hive network, and it slows the simulation down to a crawl. It leaves you with a feeling of ambiguity that I thought was interesting. Like, is this bad? Does it mean that the land is basically like frozen?
I thought about this a little bit. So like, I mean, my many thoughts about computationalism, but like this is from my perspective, it kind of doesn't really matter like what speed this world is run at, because I guess if Enoch is any indication, like it doesn't matter anymore what happens, because it will be felt as whatever real speed is.
Yeah.
Possibly even independent of whether it's being run or not. So
yeah, like not something that bothered me a ton, but basically just I was like, yeah, and I guess they already mentioned that they're like building Dyson spheres basically. Yeah. So they'll probably eventually have the processing power they need to run it fast again. But it was I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like little things where it made me think, and I was like, where's this going? And then it kind of never goes anywhere further until you're left to just think, well, what does that mean by itself then? Like I really thought it was cool the bit where it's the atom part, and which is a whole part we didn't really talk about other than briefly touching on, that I loved, where it's just like these AIs are trying to find their place in the world and understand what they are. And so what I was going to reference specifically was the bit where like he realizes that every time a person like takes abuse from another person without fighting back, or like does an ignoble thing, then they're literally shrunken in stature.
Yeah,
and like they become literally smaller and more and like less perfect. And I think I guess that did continue on, because I guess that's the mechanism for like why the orcs are so crappy, is that they're
it's sort of like the reality is built out of like what Dodge thinks of as morality, kind of like at the fundamental level. So
that makes sense.
Like people, I mean, he wills things into being because he's like the firmament, but this sort of is always true. Like even earlier on, where he could only do it if people weren't looking at him. Like other people sort of had the ability to mold stuff themselves.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of vague and.
Yeah. So just like the theology aspect, like I don't think Stephenson is just being cute here. Like it's very interesting to consider this concept that he's introduced, where it's the idea of like everything is a mote in God's eye. Like the world of the land is like a sub process of Dodge.
Yeah.
It's all just Dodge. Right. It's manifestation of him. It's not like there's a 3D grid that he's imputing his ideas onto. It's more like it was just a simulation of his brain, and he was going crazy, so he started basically imagining other other things, and those imaginings were real, and then everyone else just basically loaded into his imagination. So and then eventually they kind of separate off the like there's the whole thing where they're like, well, we're not gonna charge you for the whole Dodge process because clearly everyone is living inside the Dodge process. Which I don't know. If you think about the theological implications of that, it's endlessly rewarding.
It's like theological / legal implications.
Yes, same thing, right?
Yeah, right. No, I think my favorite thing about just everything living on Dodge is how when his friend, what's his name, the guy that was his guide behind the geography of his MMO.
It was something very Pluto.
Oh, Pluto, yeah. So how Pluto just spends his entire existence going around fixing Dodge screwed up world,
which is what he did in life too.
Which is what he did in life, yeah. That
was great. I love Corvallis being a raven, and I also want to do recreational pretending to be a Roman legionnaire.
Yeah,
or however you say that word.
Yeah, I think that's how you say it.
But that's because you learned it from me when we were children.
That's true.
But
that's also true.
I don't know. I feel like this book definitely deserves like a full 2-hour book club treatment where we like dig into everything in detail. And even then, I don't know. There's parts of it that are going to be endlessly rewarding to dig into. You could probably write a whole essay about any facet of the things we've just talked about.
Yeah. So
Neal Stephenson does not disappoint.
He does not.
This is worth the wait.
Yeah. And it's sort of it is the perfect end cap to this entire like Cryptonomicon Broke Cycle Reamd story. I think that I mean, I don't even know if it is the end cap, but it's like it at least has some sense of finality.
It feels
like to see where all this was going.
Yeah, it feels pretty conclusive. I mean, it's the concept of the singularity. Like you're going beyond what you can possibly predict, and if you assume that he's portraying this idea that everything is like a fractal, and the simulated world then goes on to be much like the history of our world was. And eventually they're going to figure out how to make simulators to upload their dead into,
Yeah, so that's kind of the one point maybe against your idea of like this is progress, where it's more like this is just like the arc of human history is like we become masters of our domain, and then we simulate our world until we can live in our sim world, but then we screw it up because we're humans, and then we just have to keep doing this over and over. But like, I don't think he's saying that, but it's kind of funny that the way it looks.
I kind of do think he's saying that because like what is the ultimate manifestation of the human impulse? It's we want to master our world. Make more of the good, less of the bad. Never have to give it up. We live forever in plenty. There's no scarcity. We can be with our friends forever. I mean, it's pretty easy. Like the kind of animal we are, it's pretty easy to sketch out what we think of as paradise, even across different cultures. Yeah. But like you said, like we try to make a paradise. Dodge tries to make a paradise, even though that's not what he doesn't realize that's what he's doing. And it falls short. And then you have to try again. And I think the idea is you do have to just keep trying again. And maybe even the idea is you never finish, because like the kind of being like the heaven for a human is not going to be necessarily the same thing as a heaven for a sprung, since sprung can already reincarnate.
Right.
So like the perfectibility of the world looks different for a sprung than it looks for a human in this world.
Yeah. I mean, perfection of their world is like actually running at full resolution, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, which I guess what was weird to me, the one like got taken out of the story moment was when I was thinking like, well, why didn't they like try to do heaven right? Like at some future point, probably they'll be able to like like spin up another node of heaven on someone else, or just done from first principles instead of just like trying to turn on a brain. But maybe this is just a conceit of the story that like it's too complicated to figure out, and they lucked in to Dodge sort of creating a structure for them.
Well, I also have an answer for you, which is social media and network effects.
Yeah, that's well, yeah. This is the right. No, you're totally right.
Once you have the heaven that was made by Dodge, famous MMO creator, then who else is going to try to compete with that?
That is absolutely true.
And being part of the wrong afterlife is much worse than being part of Friendster.
Yeah.
So I think that actually does make sense. I mean, it makes sense in the same, like what we were talking about earlier. Like it makes sense in a profoundly stupid way where you're like, yeah, I mean, people should just create a better heaven. Like, wouldn't it be better to live in a better heaven? No, people are stupid. They want to live in the same heaven that everyone else is living in.
No, that's the perfect answer.
Yeah.
I am surprised people didn't try harder to like hack heaven or like communicate with it. I was totally expecting direct communication at some point between the real world and the land, and it's sort of hinted at that like El kind of maybe has a mechanism for this because he can it's mentioned that he kind of knows where Dodge is if Dodge appears in the world somehow, and like maybe the AI just tells him somehow. But like Stephenson was leaning on like quantum crypto being the answer behind no one being able to crack this, except they can like watch it happen or something.
Right. They can watch. Yeah. They can watch it by like basically analyzing the metadata.
Yeah. Looking at point cloud of what's going on instead of actually being Qualia of the world.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree that I think L did have a gateway to the outside, but I thought that was actually fun because I was like 100% sure that he did actually, but by the end of the story, he's like gone completely native.
Yeah.
He's like walking to single-handedly defeat the people who are going on the quest because he's just completely drunk the Kool-Aid of his own cult. And I
mean, he's been alive for like 1,000 years or something at this point, right?
Yeah,
like,
at least. I mean, the one funny thing is the book is quite unclear about the timescales. Like it'll say like he worked on something for an eon, and it's like, does he feel like it's an eon because he has no actual sense of objective time, or did he actually work on this for like thousands of subjective years?
Yeah, I think it ran much faster than real time for some early parts. Yeah. So I think it was just like monumental, inhuman amounts of time where he like did the world and all of its nooks and crannies. Yeah. And then slowly it sort of made parody with real world.
Yeah. I think it must have been because he did legitimately create this enormous continent just by flying around and looking at things. So that makes sense. I don't know. It's not. I'm not out of things to talk about, but I'm out of things we haven't already touched on.
I guess I just wanted to just think a little bit about kind of. I mean, people that haven't read Stephenson wouldn't have gotten to this point yet, but just like. Maybe if you're one of those listeners that hasn't read his other novels, but like are reading this one first for some reason, just that like all of his books are sort of this economics fiction instead of being like science fiction. It's like where
sociology.
Yeah. Like sociology, like some taking an idea and running with the world that results from that idea, where this book, that idea is like, basically being able to preserve your identity into the next world is power, and like how processing power you have available is literal power. Whereas like the Baroque cycle is all about establishing currency in the like 16 and 1700s, and like Cryptonomicon is about stealing a bunch of gold from those same people that were getting that gold. And like
the kind of his superpower is that he's not. It's not a cold-blooded, like axiomatic extrapolation of the consequences of economic ideas. It's let's take these economic ideas and then like refract them through the prism of human nature, which is this. You know, he's very consistent about humans being ridiculous and terrible and stupid and self-destructive and so forth. And so I think that's kind of his superpower, and that's where I feel like he's better than a lot of science fiction, or why I like Stephenson so much. I'll say is that so much science fiction, the characters feel like, I guess I have to have a character to experience the cool ideas that I thought of. And for Stevenson, it's like the idea that it's humans with all of their foibles that are kind of living this out, is what makes it interesting. In all of them, I mean, definitely like Seven Eves is one where, the book is much more about the way the people react badly to the situation they're in than it is just about like, oh, isn't it a cool concept to apocalypse? Isn't it a cool concept? No, it's his particular take on what humans do in a bitter survival situation.
Yeah, and it's not. You're totally right. It's not something that's usually how sci-fi stories are written. It's like it's taking a much longer, from like eagle's eye view of where ideas, what the ramifications of ideas are, and that's also the reason I like the Diamond Age so much. Is it's taking like, well, what if this piece of technology existed, and then just like running absolutely crazy with it across like effect it would have on an advanced civilization.
Yeah. And he does a good job of basically keeping it narrow to the thing. Like he wants to talk about nanotech in that book. He wants to talk about this afterlife in this book. And it's interesting because he does at some point later on, like when Zula is like 100 years old, there are AIs. There clearly are AIs, but it's not a huge deal, and he just doesn't want to spend time on it.
Yeah, which that was funny. It was like, here's the future you thought he would be writing about for this timeline, and it's like, no, that doesn't really matter anymore. They're just our butlers.
Yeah. I feel like we've forgotten some huge chunk of the book. I have that feeling, but I don't know what it might be. So, so I think we'll wrap up. I give this book a solid recommend, especially if you're a Neal Stephenson fan, especially if you're a science fiction fan. I'd be interested to see if people read it not being either of those things. See what they think. I'm excited to see how this book is received, just because it is very different. Different and yet similar to his other things. There's going to be a lot of reactions to this book.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I'm going to go sign up for cryonics. Excuse me. I think that's it. Did you have any final thoughts to add?
Final thought, I want these books to be made into HBO miniseries, but I know they'll ruin it, so maybe not. That's all.
Yes. What a fitting thing that you you know that the humans would just mess it up, but
they would.
But that won't stop them from trying, because it never does.
And maybe in some Neal Stephenson way, in their attempt to do it, it will make for an even better story.
That's true. Like it's beautiful. It's beautiful that they will try.
It's a beautiful mistake.
They won't do a very good job, but it's beautiful that they'll try.
Yeah.
Kind of like some other things. Well, that's all we had for everyone this week. If you have any opinions on anything that we talked about today, feel free to reach out to us at doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia.
If you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play. I still don't know what Stitcher is, by the way. And pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
It's a podcasting thing.
Yeah.
You can find this and all of our shows at doofmedia.com. Daniel, do you want to plug your Twitter handle? Do you care?
Mike, I am Bucket of Cats on Twitter, but I'm like sort of pseudonymous. I don't, you know what? Whatever.
Well,
I'm
not anymore. You're
not. On Twitter. Not anymore. There we go.
And if you like what we do here on the Doof Media Network, this show, We've Got Ward, Deep Impact, consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media. You can pledge $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to help ensure that we keep growing and making new content.
Also, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Every review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content we make here.
Well, we'll see you all at some point. I don't know when this is coming out. We recorded this early, but anyway.
In a month or so from now.
I'll see you at some point.
And you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.